Hello everyone, this is part 2 in our series about creating a basic platformer game in Unity. Previously we went ahead and we set up our tile map and created our basic little 2D world. If you were to play the game, it would look roughly something like this. We made the ground and the boxes and the gemstone part of the interactable tile map layer. We set up our props, which are the non-interactable items like the flowers and the stones, and then our background tile map, which is just right now a blue sky. In this video, we are going to go ahead and set up our 2D character. Now, in the description, there's a link to a couple of little monster characters here. We're going to use the dude monster as our player. And what we're going to do is we're going to start off by bringing in the dude monster idle. We're going to put that in our assets sprite folder. Then we're going to move that out of the way. This is all we need for now. First thing we need to do here is sprite mode multiple and set the filter mode to point. Now, these individual sprites are 32 pixels by 32 pixels, and we know that because they are squared, and it is 128 wide by 32 tall. So if you divide 128 by 4, you get 32. So we therefore know that our pixels per unit should be 32. We're going to go ahead and apply these changes. And then we're going to open up the sprite editor. And here's our little guy. And we're going to slice these up, grid by cell size, 32 by 32, do slice. And then we're going to go ahead and click apply. And now we've got our 4 individual frames. These frames belong to the, as you saw by the name of the file, the idle animation. We're going to get into animations in the next video. This one we're going to go ahead and just be working with the first one. Let's go ahead now and in our hierarchy, right click, do 2D object and sprite. And in the inspector, let's name our new sprite player. We also want to go ahead and, for now, let's zero out our X, Y, and Z. Go back here to the scene tab. You'll see that it's put your player at the X, Y, and Z. Now, some of you may notice this camera image sometimes gets in the way. If you go up here to Gizmos and drop it down and find the camera, you want to leave the checkbox on. But what you can do is click on this little camera icon itself, and that'll hide it here in the scene view. So that no longer will get in your way, but you still have your camera layout. You can still click on the camera, see the camera preview, all that. Now, right now there is our player floating here in the middle. Let's go ahead and, after changing the name, change the layer. I'm going to do add layer, and we're going to add a player layer. Click back on player in the hierarchy. We can now set the layer to player. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to take, down here in sprites, the first frame of the player's idle animation and drag it into the sprite render sprite field here in the inspector. So now we've got our player. Let's go ahead and let's take our player and let's move them over here. Put them a little bit above the ground, and that's so that you can see later on that when we go ahead and start the game, the player's gravity is kicking in and they're colliding. But for now, we're just putting them over there. Let's go ahead and let's start setting up our character and his different components in Unity. First, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start with a rigid body 2D. Now, as you may have learned in our previous tutorials, a rigid body is basically what gives the object a physical presence in the world and allows them ultimately to collide with things, to have gravity applied to them, to give them mass, materials can be applied to them, things like that. Okay. The only thing we're going to change for now is we're going to set the gravity scale to 3. This is going to come up with our jump mechanic later on. We may end up playing with this, but for now we're going to set it to 3. In collision detection, go ahead and set it to continuous. This is the player. So we want to make sure that we are accurately tracking their collision when we get to that point. So instead of doing discrete, we're going to set it to continuous. And lastly, this is a 2D platformer. We don't need to rotate the character in space. So we're going to go ahead and lock the rotation on the z-axis. That'll keep the player from doing things like going head over heels as they go ahead and hit objects. They'll always stay standing upright. Now, you're not going to see any benefits right now from doing this. If we were to run the game, the player should just go ahead and fall right through the world. Yep. What we're going to do next is we're going to set up our colliders. Now, the colliders are what allow our player to have collision. In the past, we've gone ahead and we only set up a single collider, and we wrapped the whole player around that. Or we wrapped it all around the player. Zoom in here. You're going to see here. We're going to do something a little different. Our player has a very round head and a mostly round body. Okay? So what we're going to do here is we're going to add a circle collider. We're going to go ahead and modify that collider. And we're going to set the offset to be a little bit lower here. And then we might want to increase its size. Probably go ahead and adjust the X offset. That to be a negative 0.3, 2.1. We'll just leave it at 0. That's good enough for what we're doing here. Now that gives us our first collider. We're going to go ahead and we're going to add a second collider, another circle, and this one's going to be for the body. So let's go ahead and edit this one as well. Get its size. And we're going to move it so it's closer to where we need it. Let's do a 0.25, 26, 27. Do 26. And then we're going to set the y value to be, or the x value to be negative 0.1, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3. That looks good. Let's go ahead and make the radius a little bit bigger. 0.21, 22. Yeah, that looks good. Okay. So now we've got our player and they've got two colliders on them. And this is going to help in giving us much more accurate collision. Rather than having one collider that's a box that wraps around the whole thing or a circle around the whole thing, we can go ahead and apply multiple colliders to a single object and make it so that there's a lot closer to its shape collision detection going on. And then you can also apply different things to the collision. Now, one thing to note here, you see how you have this little corner, this little edge here where the circles meet? If you had a box, it'd be even worse. This has a tendency to get stuck on other objects. When it collides, an object may get wedged right there. You may find yourself able to move your character and give them the appearance that they are pushing against a wall in midair and holding on to it. We want to go ahead and avoid that. So you'll see here on the colliders there's something called a material, a physics material. Down here in Project, click on Assets, and right click and do Create, and we want to do a Physics Material 2D. And we're going to call it Slippery. What we want to do is give it a friction and a bounciness of 0. Now whatever we apply this to will have no friction. We're going to drag Slippery from the Assets window over to our circle colliders, and we're going to put it in the material section. This will make it now, again, something you won't be able to really see right now, but later on when we're moving around and we run into these crates over here and we run into the corners of the landmass here, it'll allow the player to go ahead and slide off of them. The player won't be able to go ahead and somehow latch onto them and do things that we don't intend them to do as the game creator. Right. Now that goes ahead and sets up our basic character without any movement or anything. And if we start the game, he drops into place, and there he is, right where we expect him to be. Of course, now he can't do anything, not yet. Now, where we're going to start as far as code goes for this is we're actually going to take Unity provides for you a 2D character controller. Okay? You can find that in the Unity Asset Store, but this right here, this is a character controller that has been refined a bit. Now, if we go into Assets and Scripts in our project window, this particular file will have been linked in the notes down below. As you're watching this video, you can go ahead and download this zip file from GitHub. You can unzip it, and inside you'll come to the character controller 2d.cs. Go ahead and just drag this into the scripts folder. And then go ahead and take that and drag it onto the player. If we select the player, you'll now see that they have character controller 2D. The character controller does exactly what you think it does. It gives you control of the character in 2D space, and a character controller is where you put a lot of the functionality that the controller should have. In this case, this one provides you with how strong their jump should be when they're crouching, how fast should they move, movement smoothing, that's transitioning between movements, like crouching, jumping, and walking. Air control, whether or not you should be able to control the character, move them while they are jumping. Some games, if you jump into the air, you can only jump, and whatever your momentum was when you jumped is the direction you move. And some games allow you to, while you're jumping and falling through the air, to continue to move left and right. We're going to go ahead and enable this. Then we have what is ground. Now, earlier in the previous video, I said let's go ahead and assign a layer called environment for all of our interactable tile map pieces. Okay? What is ground is our environment. We want the player to be able to go ahead and interact and treat the ground, or the environment rather, as the ground. Now, there are two things here that this character controller came with. One of them is ground check and ceiling check. These are things that we'll use, objects that we'll use to go ahead and check and see, hey, where's the ground and where's the ceiling? We're not going to go ahead and use the crouch disable collider. That's something that this character controller provides. I'm not going to explain it right now. But the ground check and the ceiling check makes sense. This is a platformer game. We need to know, have we hit our head on something? Have our feet touched something? To do this, go ahead and in the hierarchy, right click and go ahead and choose create empty. Now it should assign an empty object to it. Right click and create empty again. Now let's call the first one ceiling check, and let's call the second one ground check. Oh, you can see them. If we zoom in on these, go ahead and select the ceiling check. Make sure you are on the move icon up here in the top left, and let's move this so that it's just near the top of the head of the player. And for the ground check, let's move it so it's just near the feet. Not all the way, but just there. Yeah, so you can see there's a ceiling and a ground check. If you go ahead and reselect player, scroll back down to the character controller 2D, we can take ceiling check and drag it from the hierarchy over to ceiling check and drop it here. And it sticks it in. Same with ground check. Over here in the hierarchy, we can click and drag ground check and drop it into the ground check field on the character controller 2D. Now, these are going to go ahead and do some automatic stuff on the background because of the character controller. What they're really doing is exactly how it sounds. They're checking to see, have I hit the ceiling? Have I hit the ground? What object do I want to use to check, have I hit the ceiling and hit the ground? And it's these two objects that we've created and parented to the player. So now they'll stick with the player, they'll follow them around. That'll go ahead and work really well for checking that kind of activity. All right, now the next thing we're going to do is actually give our player some movement. So go ahead and here in the scripts folder again down in project, and right click, create, and do C# script. And we're going to call it player movement. Capital P, capital M, no spaces. Player movement. Right. Let's go ahead and let's drag and drop that now up onto the player. And let's go ahead and open the file. So double click player movement. Should open up Visual Studio. Okay. Here's our basic player movement script. Now, we are not going to go ahead and do anything with the start method right now. So we can go ahead and actually, let's delete that. Let's get it out of the way. We're going to go ahead and our player, in order to move, needs to have access to a couple things. Namely, they need to have access to the character controller 2D that is part of that. So go ahead and put public character controller 2D controller. Go ahead and zoom in on this a bit more. This is this variable will have access to an object that is of type character controller 2D. If you were to save this script right now and go back to Unity and click on player, scroll to the bottom, you're going to see the player movement script with a controller variable. Right now nothing's assigned to it, and it wants it to be of character controller type or 2D. You can go ahead and just above it, the character controller 2D script, you can click and drag that down onto the other script and fill in that controller field. Now, whenever in our code we type the word controller, we're going to get access to all of this information up here in the character controller 2D script that's also assigned to the player. We're going to need a few other variables for now. We're going to need a public float run speed. That's just what rate is the player going to go ahead and move at. We're going to go ahead and set that to 25 as the default. It's a public variable, so it can be changed in Unity, but the default will be 25. And now let's go ahead and let's do some of our private variables. We're going to float horizontal move equals 0. Okay? So our player will move at a speed of 25, but their current horizontal movement speed is 0. Okay? And that's their default. And we're just setting this up. Now, let's go ahead and go down here in our update method. Now, your update method should be where you go ahead and pull information. But as you get to more advanced projects, you realize it's not where you should be doing things like actually setting player speed and changing movement and all that. It's where you should be checking for things like collision and updating whether or not keyboard presses have been pressed. So in this case, let's go ahead and we're going to get the horizontal move. What we want to do is check to see, has the actual human player pressed the horizontal inputs? Times run speed. Now, what's going on here is we're going to assign to the horizontal move variable a value. And that value is, first we check the input object. The input object goes ahead and has access to any input that the player has, such as the keyboard, the mouse, a controller. Get access raw. It gets the value based upon the named set. Horizontal is left and right. That would be A, or the left arrow key, or D, and the right arrow key. If I'm moving to the right, then I am moving +1. If I'm moving to the left, I'm moving -1. 0 means I'm not moving at all. So if no horizontal keys are being pressed, okay, they're not doing A, D, left or right, it's 0. If they're moving to the left, it's -1. If they're moving to the right, it's 1. And we're going to go in and we're going to use that to determine, am I moving right or left, 1 or -1, or am I not moving at all, 0. And based upon that, we will multiply it by the run speed, 25. So that means we're either moving -25 to the left, 25 to the right, or 0. Now that right there is all we're going to do for now. In here, we're just going to use update to see, hey, has the player gone ahead and pressed a button, and are they moving? What we're going to use next is another method called void fixed update. You can get rid of the private. It's by default private, I just don't like it there. Now, fixed update is another method that is built into Unity. Update is called as often as it can. Fixed update makes sure that it's called at a more regular interval. You still can't use it to go ahead and assume that you're going to get the same number of frames per second or anything like that. but it's more of a steady cadence of calls as opposed to update, which just fires as fast as possible as many times as it can. Now, in fixed update, we're going to go ahead and piggyback off of update. We're going to take our controller variable, which again references our character controller 2D, and built into that is a method called move. They've already written for us a way to go ahead and move our character. Now, you'll see that it takes in 3 variables: movement, whether or not you're crouching, and whether or not you're jumping. For now, we're going to take the horizontal move, so our speed and direction that we are moving, 0, 25, negative 25. We're going to multiply this by time, fixed delta time. Now what this does is it smooths our animation. It smooths our movement, rather. It will go ahead and make sure that we are only moving a fraction of the amount of time since the last time we called fixed update. Okay? So rather than try to move 25 pixels at all times, it's going to go ahead and make sure that it takes into account how many times have we called fixed update in a second. What is our frame rate right now? How often has we called this? And it's going to smooth it out. And then we're going to go ahead and set false and false for the crouching and jumping variables. Okay? Because right now we don't have crouching or jumping built into the game. If we were to go ahead and save this, go back to Unity, make sure you select your player, scroll down to the bottom, make sure player movement is set up, you've got your run speed, and let's go ahead and let's run our game. We should be able to, using left and right arrow keys, move back and forth. You'll notice that the character controller automatically handles flipping the character right and left based upon the direction you're moving. We can go ahead and we could change the speed if we wanted to on the fly. It handles all of that tedious stuff that is just built in that should be part of a 2D game by default. And there we go. We now have a basic 2D character that is in the game that can go ahead and move left and right. And right now he can't jump. He can collide with the rest of the world. If I go ahead and back up here, you can see that he lands and he's moving right along the edge of the ground. And that about does it for this video.